In 1872, in the town of Meredith, New Hampshire, on Lake Winna-pee-saukee, construction workers hired by Seneca A. Ladd, a local businessman, unearthed a mysterious egg-shaped stone. What could it possibly be? The stone stumped everyone. Seneca Ladd believed it to be an Indian relic. He kept it in his possession for many years. After his death, his daughter donated it to the New Hampshire Historical Society in 1927. Due to its discovery near the shores of Lake Winnipesaukee, the Ladd family dubbed it the Mystery Stone of Lake Winnipesaukee. The stone measures 4 inches in length and 2.5 inches at its widest part of the base. The creator of the stone used quartzite, a smooth rock that was formed by shifting rock layers. This type of rock is not native to New Hampshire. Of course, this doesn't necessarily mean that it wasn't made in the state. The sculptor of the black stone covered its surface in pictographs. The symbols include carvings of arrows, a moon, spirals, an ear of corn, a face, and a teepee. These symbols have led many to believe it is, in fact, a Native American artifact. However, other researchers claim it may be of Celtic or Inuit origins. In other parts of the world, people have found stones of a similar shape, often referred to as stone eggs, but the Lake Winnipesaukee Mystery Stone is the first of its kind in the United States. What is perhaps most baffling about the stone are the holes that are bored into both sides and ends of it. The holes vary in size and are not tapered. They are very smooth, suggesting that someone with modern tools drilled them. Perhaps someone with power tools from the 19th or 20th centuries is responsible. Possibly, a Native American was the original creator, and at a later date, a modern workman discovered it and defaced it. However, the etchings around the holes suggest that they were probably part of the original design. Scratches on the lower bore suggest it was placed on a metal shaft and removed several times, according to one analysis done by New Hampshire state officials in 1994. Richard Boisvert, a state archaeologist, believes these holes are highly regular. I've seen a number of holes bored in stone with technology that you would associate with prehistoric North America. There's a certain amount of unevenness, and this hole was extremely regular throughout. What we did not see was variations that would be consistent with something that was several hundred years old. Boisvert, who deeply laments the lack of details on the context in which the stone was found, went on to suggest that the holes were drilled using power tools rather than traditional techniques used by Native Americans. He added that there was every chance the holes were made during the 19th century, which would mean tampering of the object. This has led some to believe the Winnipesaukee stone mystery is simply some kind of elaborate hoax. The only thing that seems certain, or of which there is consensus, is that it was created using some type of machine. However, the fact remains that no one knows who made the object, when, or why. So what was the purpose of the Lake Winnipesaukee Mystery Stone? As with many artifacts, It is sometimes impossible to know exactly what something is or what purpose it once served. In the case of the Lake Winna-pee-saukee Mystery Stone, there are many theories. Wesley G. Bala, director of collections and exhibitions at the New Hampshire Historical Society, received a letter claiming that the stone was in all likelihood a thunderstone. Thunderstones exist in mythology and folklore. Hundreds of years ago, oddly shaped stones often turned up in fields. Farmers and peasants thought that thunderbolts fell from the sky and were buried in the earth. Later, more scientifically inclined thinkers theorized that these stones were the tools of early man. Possibly, the Lake Winnipesaukee Mystery Stone was some kind of ancient tool. Perhaps the holes were used to situate the stone on a strong stick that allowed the carrier to hit things. If it wasn't a tool, some claim that it could have been a storytelling device or a way of keeping record of a tribe's history. Some have posited that the ear of corn plus the crossed arrows, along with the teepee, mean that it was a treaty between two tribes. This theory is supported by the idea that the holes let it rest on a stake in the ground to mark a line between territories, and this is one of the more popular theories. The last theory that seems to have any substantial proof is that the whole Lake Winnipesaukee Mystery Stone is a hoax. If someone with modern tools created the holes, perhaps an artist carved the whole stone back in the 1800s for a laugh. Indigenous historian Joe Graveline suggested an interesting purpose for the Mystery Stone. He told Greenfield Recorder in 2018 that he believes it was a Native American birthstone. According to the Greenfield Recorder, a birthstone is a stone that was heated and internally placed inside the pregnant woman by midwives to relax muscles during difficult births. Graveline says this particular stone would have been extra special and used by a Native American midwife to help a mother deliver a person who became a venerated spiritual or government leader of either sex. He also believes that it was a grave offering, and if the construction workers had dug a little deeper, they would have encountered bones. At one time, the Mystery Stone attracted the wonder of the scientific world, with the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., offering to send a map to Seneca A lad to make a casting of the egg. Today, the Lake Winnipesaukee Mystery Stone is on display in a case at the Museum of New Hampshire History, surrounded by mirrors to show off its unique and enigmatic features. In July 1934, two miners in the San Pedro Mountains came across something rarer than gold. After blasting their way into a hidden mountain cavern, the miners discovered a diminutive human body, no more than 14 inches at its full height, naturally mummified by the Wyoming climate. The tiny mummy was unique. After the miners removed it from its cave, it was exploited as a spectacle by various local businesses in Wyoming before its mysterious disappearance in the 1950s. Before it vanished, the mummy, which became known as Pedro, was subjected to rudimentary scientific tests. However, Its mysterious disappearance frustrated the solution of the most compelling mystery of all. Was Pedro an adult or a child? Some of the experts believed Pedro to be the only preserved example of a lost Native American pygmy race, while others maintained the mummy was, in fact, the tragic infant victim of a rare congenital disorder. Attempts have been made using comparative evidence to answer these questions in the absence of the body. But is it possible to solve the mystery of the San Pedro Mummy in its absence? During the summer of 1934, Cecil Main and Frank Carr were mining for gold in the San Pedro Mountains. They were chasing a particular seam of gold when it disappeared into the rock face. The two miners had no choice but to blast away the rock to reach their goal. However, once the dust from the explosion settled, Main and Carr discovered to their disappointment that the gold had disappeared. Instead, they found a small cave measuring no more than 15 feet long and 4 feet wide. In it, sitting cross-legged on a ledge, his arm wrapped around his torso, was a most unusual find. Main and Carr had discovered Pedro, no more than 6.5 inches tall in his sitting position. The withered creature had been naturally mummified, leaving it perfectly preserved. Its brown, wrinkled flesh remained intact, even down to its fingernails. However, its other features were curious. The head was covered with a gelatinous substance. Beneath this, the mummy's facial features seemed unusual. The nose was flattened, as was the skull, which gave it a low, flat forehead. The mummy's heavy-lidded eyes bulged, and its broad, thin-lipped mouth hid a full set of teeth. The little mummy's appearance was contradictory, childlike, and yet ancient. The two miners immediately recognized they had a phenomenon on their hands, one that people would pay good money to see. So they took Pedro 60 miles southwest to the town of Casper. And thus, Pedro's career as a Wyoming sideshow exhibit began. The mummy passed through several pairs of hands until 1936. It was on display in a drugstore window in the town of Meeteetse. The drugstore owner, Floyd Jones, made good money from his unusual window display by selling postcard souvenirs. In this way, Pedro's fame began to spread. The discovery of the mummified remains led to significant speculation that the remains were a hoax. The presence of the gelatinous substance on Pedro's head led some to believe that the remains were actually those of a deceased infant, recovered from a medical facility, or that the prospectors had created the remains using a crude form of taxidermy. However, others maintained the remains were evidence of a leprechaun-like race, like those mentioned in the legends of the local indigenous people, or evidence of an extraterrestrial being. It was difficult for many to fathom that a human of such tiny stature could possibly be an adult. While modern testing could provide many more answers about the origins of Pedro, such testing is not possible because the location of the remains has been unknown for several years. It is said that the remains were put on display during sideshows in the 1940s and were then purchased by a man named Ivan Goodman. Upon Goodman's death in 1950, the remains passed to a man named Leonard Waller. The remains have not been since seen. With the remains nowhere to be found, the mysteries of Pedro linger to this day. Most scientists agree that Pedro's remains were those of an adult male human. However, modern testing could have answered so many additional questions, like where he came from, whether he suffered any diseases or congenital conditions, what the gelatinous substance was, and how his remains came to be sealed within a thick layer of rock. The answers to these questions, and many others, are likely to remain unanswered unless the remains can be located and further tested. Until then, scientists and enthusiasts can only speculate about who or what he was. Last week, archaeologists in Peru discovered a faded carving on the desert hillside. After a thorough cleaning, the figure, which had previously barely been visible, revealed itself to be a cat. The feline carving is what's known as a geoglyph, and it's the latest discovery among the group of drawings in the Nazca Desert that are often called the Nazca Lines. Many of them were created around 2,000 years ago. According to Peru's Ministry of Culture, the cat etching dates to 200 to 100 BCE, making it the oldest known geoglyph unearthed at Nazca. The discovery shows, once again, the rich and varied cultural legacy of this site, the ministry said in a statement. The ancient geoglyph, which measures 37 meters across, forms part of the Nazca Lines, a collection of hundreds of mysterious artworks etched into a plateau 250 miles south of Lima. The cat joins an array of other zoomorphic drawings found across the region's landscape over the last century, including depictions of a hummingbird, a monkey, and a pelican. The discovery was made during maintenance work at a visitor vantage point in what was already a popular tourist destination. The Nazca Lines were created by people from pre-Hispanic societies who removed the top layers of rock and gravel to reveal a lighter color bedrock beneath. Although very few human-like figures have been found in the region, archaeologists have discovered large-scale depictions of animals, birds, plants, and everyday objects. A number of mysterious geometric shapes and patterns, including spirals and triangles, were also carved into the desert landscape. Most lines run straight across the landscape, but there are also figurative designs of animals and plants. Paul Kosick, an American historian from Long Island University in New York, is credited as the first scholar to study the Nazca Lines in depth. While in Peru in 1940 to 1941 to study ancient irrigation systems, he flew over the lines and realized that one was in the shape of a bird. Another chance observation helped him see how lines converged on the horizon at the winter solstice in the southern hemisphere. He began to study how the lines might have been created, as well as try to determine their purpose. He was joined by archaeologist Richard P. Schadel from the United States and Maria Reich, a German mathematician and archaeologist from Lima, to try to determine the purpose of the Nazca Lines. They proposed that the figures were designed as astronomical markers on the horizon to show where the sun and other celestial bodies rose on significant dates. Archaeologists, historians, and mathematicians have all tried to determine the purpose of the lines. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, however, other researchers, including American astronomer Gerald Hawkins, examined the Nazca Lines and disagreed with the astronomical explanation for the geoglyphs. They also poked holes in other far-out explanations, such as those relating to aliens or ancient astronauts. Determining how they were made has been easier than determining why they were made. Scholars have theorized that the Nazca people could have used simple tools and surveying equipment to construct the lines. Archaeological surveys have found wooden stakes in the ground at the end of some lines, which supports this theory. One such stake was carbon dated and was the basis for establishing the age of the design complex. While the Nazca Lines form shapes that are best seen from the air, they are also visible from the surrounding foothills and other high places. The shapes are usually made from one continuous line. The largest ones are about 370 meters long. Because of its isolation and the dry, windless, stable climate of the plateau, the lines have mostly been preserved naturally. Extremely rare changes in weather may temporarily alter the general designs. As of 2012, the lines are said to have been deteriorating because of an influx of squatters inhabiting the lands. The lines and geoglyphs cover an area of around 450 square kilometers. UNESCO added the site to its World Heritage List in 1994 and described it as one of archaeology's greatest enigmas. The designs were believed to have been created when ancient Peruvians scraped off a dark and rocky layer of earth, which contrasts with lighter-colored sand underneath. In recent years, advances in drone technology, artificial intelligence, and satellite photography have led archaeologists to discover drawings with increasing frequency. In 2019, a team of Japanese researchers from Yamagata University unearthed more than 140 geoglyphs at Nazca, including images of llamas, a two-headed snake, birds, and alpacas. It's quite striking that we're still finding new figures, but we also know that there are more to be found. Johnny Isla, director of the Nazca Lines Conservation Minister at the Ministry of Culture, told Euronews. He added, "In fact, there are new ones, and we will continue to find more."